Hello. Today I want us to talk and reflect honestly on the commandment of God, one of the 10 commandments of do not commit adultery. And I remember some years ago, Oprah Winfrey show, they did research to find out what it was that people hated about adultery. And the overriding answer was not what you might first think of sexual betrayal, sexual unfaithfulness. No, it wasn't that. It was the fact that people were lying to each other and deceiving each other. Because, as the film Brief Encounter showed, that very famous film, 1940s, when you're meeting up with somebody who's married, both people, they invariably starts lying and excuses and what you might call white lies or economical with the truth. And this is what, in the research of the Oprah show, they found that this was the thing that people hated about adultery. It was the lying. And the fact, where were you? Oh, I went to see a friend, and of course they hadn't been to see a friend, they'd seen the lover. And that is what seemed to hurt the most, was this lying. They'd been trusting this person. They assumed that when they spoke things, they were telling them the truth. If they were going out to see a friend, well, they were going out to see a friend. If they were late from work, it's because they had to stay late and work. They just believed them, and you end up feeling like an idiot for believing and trusting somebody that when they say the reason they're late is because they had to work late, and you just take it on board as being the truth. You think, well, why should I disbelieve that? And then this is what's so, I think, so awful, and this is what came across in the film Brief Encounter, the same lying. And that's when the character Celia Johnson, I remember she was saying it was all the lying, as she just, everything changed as soon as she started to lie. That's when everything became dirty. Everything became dirty as soon as she lied. She could have told her husband that she bumped into her doctor at Cardoma, and they had a nice little chat, but she didn't. And that's really when she began to realise, why haven't I told my husband something so simple, which he would not have a problem with? But of course she didn't tell him because there were feelings involved. And this was not just like bumping into your doctor and, there's no physical attraction. It's just, oh, hello, saw Dr. So-and-so, did you? How is he? He's all right. No, it's not that. This is a conversation with the doctor, and there's a very deep mutual attraction. And of course it's that deep mutual attraction and her feelings for him that are aroused, when she's just having a cup of tea with him, that causes her to lie. And that's when it all started, of just not telling him that she bumped into a doctor, in a coffee bar. And she was having to explore why she wasn't telling her husband this, because of her feelings for this man. And, this is the hard thing about adultery, is when you if we can just set aside having bits on the side and just, obviously a lot of people, if it's just for sex and it's just like just for sex, then it's very easy to be condemning of adultery. What makes adultery very hard, and this is where it's all about obedience to God, because it just boils down to like following the rules, whether you like it or not, because by breaking that commandment of adultery, so often people are breaking it not because they're just having a bit on the side, a little bit of nookie and things like that. It can sometimes be that they do actually meet somebody who they genuinely do have very, very strong feelings for, very deep feelings, and they could be meet somebody and feel, this is somebody I really could fall in love with, or this is the kind of person I wish I'd married. If I had my time over again, this would be the person I would choose to be with. And how difficult it is if you're in a marriage and it's not that you don't love your partner, it's just that you meet somebody and there's just that something, that connection and very deep feelings. And of course there's a sexual attraction, we're not denying that, but there's also a whole range of other very, very deep feelings and just longings. And I've been thinking about this, and I've suddenly realised how very, very hard it is if you're in that situation of it's about having to say no when everything in you is wanting to say yes. Everything in you wants to say yes. Yes, 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 you are absolutely, just what I need. You are just a person and everything. But you have to say no. And it's the old cliche, it's very, very hard. And it is very hard if there's deep feelings involved. Where you perhaps have a marriage and there's, it's not all bad, but you've met somebody and there's something much deeper, and a deeper connection, a deeper feelings, and it's dreadfully, dreadfully painful, and you're having to do the right thing, and the right thing is the Ten Commandments is no. And obeying that commandment of not committing adultery is simply about putting aside your heart, of what your heart is saying, these deep feelings and deep desires and longings and yearnings for this person, and you have to put it all aside and say no to it, and say no to it. And I suddenly realised how incredibly difficult it is. Now, when I say it's difficult, it doesn't mean that you don't do it, because most things that are worthwhile are difficult. Nothing's easy in life. The things we have to do in life that are right are difficult. But we can make excuse. Well, the excuse we give ourselves for those in that situation is, because I feel so strongly, because it's so deep, because it's so real, then everything in you wants to go with it, doesn't it? It's your heart, it's your emotions, everything is veering towards that act of adultery. And whether, that obviously one of the people will be married, one of the people will be actually guilty of adultery, but the second person might be also be married and they will be committing adultery, but the second person might not be married, and that's a very common scenario. The stereotypical middle-aged man and the younger single woman who genuinely believes, again, it's about often fed words economical with the truth, like I don't sleep with my wife, which research has been done into this, and it's found that all these men admit they're lying. Then it's not actually true. When they tell these girlfriends that they're not sleeping with their wives, it's simply not true. And things gets very, very complex, because of course they're wanting to keep everything normal at home, and part of normal life at home is having marital relations, and so the husband can't afford for the wife to get suspicious, so he goes along. Also, it might not be a problem anyway. He's quite happy to have marital relations with his wife and have a girlfriend who's single, and he could equally love both of them in different ways. But what is that single lady guilty of? She's not guilty of the actual act of adultery, but she's complicit in it. And this is what single women have to wrestle with if they're going to think about this commandment of do not commit adultery, because you're complicit in it. Now, we understand why that you love the man, that you feel deeply for the man, that it's just a heart, everything is so, and I've suddenly realised, I mean, I've heard so much of it, during my life, but I've suddenly realised this is a very, very difficult commandment to obey. It is a very, very, very difficult commandment to obey. If you meet somebody and there's genuinely deep, deep feelings, most people say don't murder, and most people say, well, that's not a problem, we shouldn't murder, and surely most people would not have a problem committing murder. Right, most people say, well, I don't have a problem with that commandment because I've never felt I needed to murder anybody. I wouldn't want to murder anybody. So it's like, well, this is an easy commandment for me to do, isn't it? But it's all about what life throws at you. If your little girl of 5 was raped by a neighbour, maybe you'd feel differently, and you would feel you'd want to murder the man that did it, and you might well be tempted to do it. And I think it's the same with adultery, that those on the outside who perhaps don't always grasp how this is it's what a hard commandment to obey when you meet somebody who you feel very, very deeply with, and it's mutual, and there could be something, and there could have been something if things had been different, but things are not different, and things are the way they are, and you have to make a decision. Even like single women or single men who are, getting attracted to somebody who's married, or getting involved with somebody like that, because you're heading into that complicity with adultery. They're the ones who are going to be guilty of the actual act of adultery, but you are part of it, because if you weren't there, they wouldn't be doing it, and you might say, well, they'll be doing it with somebody else. Well, don't make excuses. I mean, you are there, and they take you, and you have to take some responsibility, and you've made yourself available, and you've agreed to it. You've agreed to be part of this act of adultery. You've agreed that you will be involved in this. You know, they are the ones guilty of the act of adultery, but you are, by definition, because you submitted to it and said, and you were part of it, it's really, you know, you've done something, you've definitely done something wrong. And so one can say, well, don't get involved with a man unless, or a woman, unless they're actually divorced. Unless they're actually divorced. There's a saying, there's no such thing as just a cup of coffee. You know, and if somebody who is married is asking you, you know, go for it, oh, just a cup of coffee, or just this, just a drink, just that, just this. It all seems so innocuous, just a cup of tea, you know, but it's not, because as the film Brief Encounter showed, this was just a cup of tea, and already feelings were developing between them. Though, so that when the lady went home, Celia Johnson, she didn't tell her husband that, oh, by the way, I bumped into the doctor and he was in the Cardoma and we had a nice little chat and he was telling me all about his work. No. And this is what the character wrestled with, because it was so obvious that she should feel like why cannot I tell my husband this? Because he wouldn't have a problem with it. Say, oh, did you see him? You bumped into him? Oh, yes, and he would be very interested, because he totally trusted his wife. But she couldn't tell her husband this, the reason being because she'd already, over that cup of tea, was developing feelings for this man, this doctor, and vice versa. And it was as those feelings were beginning during that cup of coffee, that cup of tea. So what should she have done in that situation? Ideally, if we go back, she should have actually told her husband, I saw that doctor again and he was in the Cardoma and we had a cup of tea and had a nice little chat. And that would have been the end of it. And that could have been the end of it. Because she's told her husband, they just had a cup of tea. She's not hiding anything. She's done nothing wrong. And he says, oh, fine. He's not suspicious. He's just, you know, it's all, well, you bump into people and you have a chat. But the very fact that she didn't want to tell him, that again is revealing, because it's revealing something going on inside her, of these feelings that they were developing for this doctor. And I'm suddenly realizing that how very, very hard it is, really, for both the married person and for the single person, that if you make a connection with somebody and they're not available, you have to obey that commandment, even though everything in you doesn't want to. You mean you don't want to? Not you. You would love to commit adultery with that. You would love to have that intimacy with that man, and he would want that with you. So you both want it. You both want to be together. You both want the intimate relationship. Everything in you, mind, body, everything in you is yearning for that person. And it's not just about sexual relations, it's a deep connection. It's like this feeling, this is somebody I feel could be for me, but they're not available. They're out of bounds. And the person who is married also knows they have a commitment. They're not free to have this intimate, deep connection with this other person who may be equally married or even single. And so they're looking at this single person and thinking, if only I was single again, because I would choose to be with this person. but they're already married. So the only thing to do is to say no. And I'm suddenly realizing this is very, very, very hard commandment. It's exceptionally hard, and for in the same way it would be hard for a man not to murder another man who'd raped his 5-year-old daughter. In the same way it would be as hard for him not to murder that man, not to kill him out of pure rage and vengeance, anger and everything you can imagine. And most fathers would understand that. Most people would understand. They would understand. The police understand it, because the police say, you know, don't do anything. Don't do anything. We will investigate. We leave it to us. Don't do anything, because the police realise that he could well very kill somebody, because if he found out who'd raped his little 5-year-old daughter, he would kill the man. And the police understand that. They're not condemning him. They're not sort of judging him for having these deep emotions and desires, because they think, well, if it was my daughter, I'd feel the same way. You would want to kill him, but we've been commanded by God not to kill. You see, so just to go out like that. We think it's him that's raped your daughter, so then you go out and kill the person. That's not how justice operates in this world. Right justice. The police have to investigate it, and it has to be done all properly. And of course, the law has to be followed. But you can understand the emotions of the father for wanting to kill this man. And now I'm beginning to understand the very, very strong emotions of those who are tempted to get involved with somebody who's married, or somebody who's married who's tempted to get involved with somebody who's single, or who are already involved. And the only answer is you have to say no and walk away. And this is terribly, terribly hard. It is so, so hard. And I think it's as hard in a different way as to walk away from the man who you think or suspect is very likely guilty of raping your little 5-year-old daughter. It's like you're having to do the very opposite of what you want to do. And this is what this commandment is all about. It's about doing the opposite of the very thing you want to do. But then we could say that's the same for stealing. You want to steal, and the commandment is saying, don't give in to that desire. Don't give in to that yearning. And it's about what your eyes see. You see something and you want it. You see something and you want it. But if you were blind even, you could hear something and still want it. You could still hear something and still want it. So it's about the senses, isn't it? I mean, the eyes is very easy. We can all sort of get into the eyes. But there's a lot of people in this world who are blind. So we have to remember that there are people who are blind, who again are being affected, their senses are being affected. They can't see the person, but they can hear the person, they can feel the person, they can hear the words, they can hear the tone of voice, they can hear everything. And they could be, again, your senses are just pulling you and pulling you. Everything in you wants to break that commandment. You're not wanting to break, you wish there wasn't a commandment. You wish there wasn't that commandment, because you think, oh, I wish there wasn't this commandment. But it's not that you're wanting to break a commandment. It's unfortunate that the very thing you're wanting to do is not permissible. It's not permissible. And so the only thing is, you have to just say no. And that saying no has to be demonstrated in your behaviour. And it begins in the mind of being determined and resolute to resist what you might call temptation, whatever you want to call it, this strong yearning and desire for something that is not yours to have, because in a sense, really, it's stealing. You are stealing. It's not yours. That person belongs to somebody else. They're married, or they could be, or living with that person. They've made a commitment or whatever. They belong to that person, or even if they're engaged, they're engaged. So there's a view to marriage. So it's all about, they belong to somebody else. They've made a commitment to somebody else. Everybody in society recognise that this is a couple over there. You know they're a couple over there. That everybody knows they're a couple over there. And you're going in and really stealing one of those people for yourself, when strictly speaking, they're not yours to have as far as God is concerned, because as far as he's concerned, it's a unit. And if you try and take one part of that unit, it's not yours to have. It's actually stealing. So you're not only complicit in adultery, you're also guilty of stealing. You're taking what is yours, what is not yours to have. But this is terribly, terribly, terribly difficult to do. But even though it's difficult to do, it doesn't mean we don't do it. It just, I think, it's suddenly realising how very, very costly it is to try and obey God in very important matters like this, like the Ten Commandments. I mean, they are the big ones, aren't they? It's the big ones, isn't it? And this is the hardest ones, because that's why it's like, this is the 10 hardest things. It's the 10 hardest things. But for each commandment, well, some people will find one commandment easier than another. But it depends what you've been challenged with in your life, at the point of your life. It's very easy if you're happily married or you're happily single and everything's going well, and these people that commit adultery, we can be very severe with them. And then blow me, you find yourself in that situation, you suddenly realise, now I understand. Now I understand the emotions, the feelings, the desires, that you have to say no. And that's the only answer. There is no other answer. Except if you say to the person, you'll need to get divorced, but I'm certainly not going to see you until you're divorced, which is a bit mad anyway. I mean, there's no way that could be outworked, because the whole point is you would have to date that person to find out if it was going to last anyway. And this is where you do get a dilemma when people are dating. They date somebody else at the same time because they don't want to give up one before they check the other one. So they think, well, I need to find out if the other one is suitable. And if the other's better, then I'll drop the other one. But, whether this is the ideal way of going about it with dating, I don't know. I would have thought not, really. But the way that so many people do is they have somebody, they meet somebody else, they like them, so they actually go out with two people at the same time, and they're comparing which one they prefer best. I can understand the reasoning, but probably I somehow think when you're thinking about things like the commandment of do not commit adultery, I think if you're thinking about that and then comparing it, I'd probably think the advice would be no. If you're dating somebody and you meet somebody and you're really taken with them, the best thing would be to just drop the other person and just end it and then start with the next person. In other words, just do one at a time. I think that possibly could be the lesson from the commandment of do not commit adultery, in that you're only supposed to have one person at a time. You're not supposed to be juggling two or three. And And I will just end with something that was very interesting. I used to be a Jewish believer in Jesus for 42 years. I'm not now. I no longer believe Jesus is the Messiah. But when I was in the church, I do remember hearing this 30 years ago, and it was a woman. She was the stereotypical spinster. She looked like a middle-aged. She looked classically middle-aged and dowdy. She was unmarried, but she looked, she wasn't fashionable. Her hair was conservative, and she didn't she didn't titivate herself with makeup or bracelets or jewellery, or she didn't wear modern clothing. She was very dowdy, very frumpy. She was obviously a nice person, but her physical appearance wasn't, you know, modern. It wasn't younger modern. It was sort of dowdy, and she had never been married. And what actually happened was she sort of just told me in a sort of stilted way that in her late 20s she fell madly, truly, deeply in love with a married man at the church. And as she told me this, she was very angry, and she said it was the church's fault why she had fallen in love with this married man. Because what her argument was, I remember saying, if the church had loved me enough, if people had loved me enough in the church, I wouldn't have fallen madly, truly and deeply in love with this married man. And at the time when she told me this, she was about, I don't know, she was a very old, she was a very old 45, very, very, very old, staid 45, not young at all, staid, conservative, ultra religious. And I was 10 years younger, and I remember thinking at the time, well, nobody in the church can give you cuddles. Nobody in the church can hold you in their arms and caress you and stroke your hair. But of course I couldn't say that to her, because she wouldn't have been able to cope with anything like that, because she was very staid, and also she would have been shocked and disgusted, and it just wasn't, she wasn't the type of person who could even begin to say anything like that to. But that was my first thought, and the problem with the church and the evangelical church is they're promising too much to people. They are saying, we are the people of love and we can give you everything. But the reality is, the church cannot give the love of a man to a woman and a woman to a man. They can't. The churches that can provide, compassion and understanding, and you've lost your job and you have friends there, and people commiserate with you, and they're nice, and you're not well and people pray for you and invite you for lunch or something like that, and somebody's died and they're all concerned about you. They can offer you that kind of love. We all understand that. But then that's the love that can be offered at work. You can have good workmates, can't you? And they can be kind and compassionate, when you've lost a family member, or you're not well. People, it's like, but the church cannot give the loving kindness and tenderness and the intimacy that a man gives a woman and a woman gives a man. And the problem with the evangelical church is they're promising too much. They're promising too much. And you've got single women, and there's a lot of them, and they're not getting married, and that includes me. And they're trying to convince all these single people the church is enough for you. Christian fellowship is enough for you. But what the church cannot give me is the arms of having a man hold me in my arms and me hold him in his arms. The tenderness, the intimacy, the caressing, the stroking, everything. And it's not just about the physical act of penetration. I'm talking about just lying and holding each other and caressing, and just the whole loving, the very intimate physical things that couples do to each other, stroking each other on the cheek and cupping the face and rubbing the neck lovingly and cuddling on the settee, and just that intimacy of a glance that is, because you are intimate, also intimate sexually, it creates a very deep bond. So there's something very connected between you that's only between you. It's not between anybody else. So the connection is so much more deeper. The private jokes, the private little things that you can just look across at one another and smile, and you know that person so well, and it's that very, it's literally like your other half. And in a big lonely world, a busy, hectic, rushing world, frantic world, to be able to look across the room at somebody, your spouse, somebody that you're very close to, you're intimate with, and you have that sort of moment connection because you are intimate, not just through the sexual act, but through the caressing and the confiding and cuddling in bed and waking up in the night and chatting in bed, chatting in bed, that late night chatting in bed, alone, intimate, all the intimacy. The church cannot give that. The church cannot give that. And it's trying to promise that indirectly by saying to people in the church is all you need. And also, no disrespect to God, but I want to keep this open. God is enough for you, and I'm not saying God is not enough for a person. No, I wouldn't go as far as to say that. But what I'm saying is I'm beginning, because I'm now out of Christianity, I'm now starting to rethink the things that I was programmed and conditioned, that this is the way you should be thinking. You should be thinking the church is enough for you. You should be thinking that if you believe in God, that is sufficient for you. And you want to say, well, actually, I would love to have a man hold me in his arms. I would love to be naked with a man. I'd love to be close. I'd love to stroke his hair and him stroke my hair. I'd love all of this. But you can't say that. And they're almost, what Christianity does, it denies all of the physical. But then, okay, there's a need for the physical, but that doesn't mean committing adultery. So moving forward, we can say, well, yes, you have a need for something, but if you have a need for it and you're going to seek somebody to share it with, then that person can only be single like you are, or the person has to be divorced. In other words, even though you have all these strong desires and yearnings and longings, even Christianity will say, no, all you need is the church and God, whereas Judaism would probably say, well, let's find you a match. If you really want to meet somebody and you really feel you want to get a deep connection with somebody and share your life with somebody in every way, you want to wake up with somebody in the morning. You actually want that deep intimacy of 24/7. You don't just want it to, 2 hours, 3 times a week when you're going on a date or something. So it's about what people are looking for. And I think one of the biggest one of the flaws of the evangelical churches is they're always trying to promise too much, with the best will in the world. And this woman, this spinster that I was telling you about, she was so angry at the church. She was furious at the church, and she was bitter against her fellow Christians because she felt they'd let her down. She felt that if they'd given her the love that she needed, she wouldn't have gone into the arms of this married man. But the reality was, as a single woman, she fell madly, truly, deeply in love with him. And that could have been the same if she was not a Christian. And it was unfortunate for her that the man had to be married, that the man she fell truly, deeply in love with was married. But if she'd met and fallen madly, truly, and deeply in love with a man who was single, it would have been fantastic for her, wouldn't it? It would have been fantastic, and there would have been an ending that she would have loved, you see. But she was putting the blame for her feelings for this married man on the church, saying, well, you weren't loving enough to me, you weren't kind enough to me. But obviously he, as a man, had something that she desired. There was something about him. And he's an individual, and he has certain qualities, a certain whatever, and that's what she was drawn to as a woman. And so the church cannot be expected to satisfy all the desires. And, you know, we have to, the church and all Christianity, evangelical Christianity, would say God can satisfy everything, even sexual desires. It's almost like you don't, in other words, if you have God in your life, Christianity, evangelical Christianity says, then you have no need for the cuddle. Have no need for the cuddle. You have no need for the caress. You have no need for the physical intimacy. You have no need of a hand caressing your arm. Nothing. It's like you are already spirits with no body. And this is what I think the culture I've been in for 42 years, you know, the sort of Christianity is all about that. Is I don't think even they realise that people have bodies. It's like the whole the outworking of Christianity is not taking into account that people do actually have a body. It's not just that we're spirits. I think they've missed the plot. I think they've missed the obvious. I think they've lost the obvious. They haven't recognised that these Christians have a religious belief, yes, but they're physical bodies. They're spirits in a physical body with physical desires. And then these desires are not all bad. It's about where you direct them, you see. But as Christianity is very, very good at condemnation, and it's such an unhealthy, everything about it is so unhealthy, it's such an unhealthy religion. And it's trying to tell people, all you need is God, and you actually don't need another human being. You don't need that caress. You don't need that tenderness. They almost discount it. And I think it's and that has been my experience within evangelical Christianity. It's the denying of the physical needs. So in order to satisfy physical needs, I'm not talking that you go rampant and you be promiscuous and you have no morals and you're going here, there, anywhere. But I think Judaism is probably more balanced in its saying, it's setting boundaries, isn't it? It's setting probably more realistic boundaries in saying, well, if this is the kind of person you are, then maybe you do need to find somebody. But if you're not bothered and you're quite happy being single, as many single people are, they don't feel the need for intimacy with another human being. They don't feel the longing ever to hold somebody in their arms or somebody. They don't want, and they wouldn't want to live with somebody 24 hours a day. They wouldn't want that deeper connection. And that's fine if you're happy with it, but it's when you're not happy with it. And the answer in the church, the evangelical Christians, is the church is all you need. It's other people, other relationships are supposed to satisfy all of that. And it gets very, very difficult. And I think I'm just exploring this out loud because I think somebody needs to say it. And I think to hear it, I wish I'd heard somebody say this. It's like, and you know, you're not just wanting somebody to put your arms around you like they do in church, you know, sort of friendly, you know. I don't know, I don't want that. I want the passion and the embrace of a man. And there are single men also want the passion and embrace of a woman or whatever. Don't, you know, it's like, what are you trying to fob me off of trying to say that religion is sufficient for all these needs? And it's so ridiculous. And I mean, the general norm is that people do connect at a deeper level. People do make connections. They marry or they live together, whatever, and they make the commitment and they make that deep connection. That's what the majority go for. And I've often thought about what that lady said to me, the spinster of 45, because now I'm 60, and I've thought about what she said a number of years, and I just feel very much for that younger woman that she was, because I looked at her at 45 and she was so staid and she was so dowdy, and you look at a woman like that and you think she'd never have any of these longings or yearnings, but then I suddenly looked at her and I suddenly realised it's all there, and it was there. In other words, she had all these strong yearnings of desires, just like any other woman, right? But you look at her now, dowdy spinster in the church, 45, and you think, no way, you probably think she was born like that. You probably think she never had yearnings and longings to be enveloped in the arms of a man or anything like that, you know, to have a night of passion, you know. And you suddenly realise that she did. She did. And I saw a younger photograph of her when she was about 26, and you sort of suddenly realise, I never really knew this person. All I knew was a staid spinster. Very judging, very severe, very hard-faced, you know, very bitter, very hurt. But then I got an insight into another side of her when she sort of suddenly admitted to me that she'd been madly, truly and deeply in love with this married man in the church, and she blamed the church that she'd fallen in love with him. Equally, I know another lady fell madly, truly, deeply in love with, again, a married man, and that was a real problem, and she didn't tell anybody. But it was just something I sussed out from reading between the lines, as you do, you know. Somehow it came out. And she was just couldn't let go of him. She was just in her mind, she was just still so fixated on him, and she had to let go. And of course nobody knows because she never told anybody. But again, this is another woman in her late 40s, you know, in the evangelical churches, and you would never think for a moment she would be madly, truly, deeply in love with anybody, let alone a married man, because you would assume, oh no, she wouldn't be interested in a married man. She's a, you know, a proper Christian. She wouldn't be entertaining anything like that. Of course she was. But the answer has to be, for all of regarding adultery is we all just have to walk away from it. And it's very, very hard, and everything in you wants to say yes, yes, yes. But this is what temptation is. Temptation is always about wanting to say yes. Temptation is never about wanting to say no. Temptation is always wanting to say yes. And I just realised, I have to, and it will continue and must be committed to at all times and in places to saying no. And it is very, very hard. Lots of tears are shed. I know other women have shed lots of tears. They've given up, Christian women, fallen in madly, truly, deeply in love with a married man. But the only answer is to make your mind up. I am not going to break this commandment. It's simply obedience. It's simply obedience. And you have to just ignore and say yes. Everything in me wants to say yes. My feelings, my emotions, everything wants to say yes to be with this person. But the commandment says no. And for those of us that are trying to lead good lives, to trying to obey God as best we can, we're imperfect, we have to make our minds up to simply obey the commandment, even though we don't want to. We don't want to obey the commandment. We don't want to obey it, But we do it because it's simply, this is what God requires. And it's, unfaithfulness is a very sore point with God. It's very obvious from the Hebrew scriptures that God hates infidelity. He hates infidelity. Two's all right, but three's a crowd, And you shall have no other gods before me. That we only have one God. You're not going to have two gods. You can't have three gods. You only have one God. And in the same way we only believe in one God, we can only have one partner at a time. And that partner has to be free. So when two people come together, they both have to be free. Whether they're both divorced or whether they're both single, they both have to be free. And that is the only conditions from the Hebrew Bible that is permissible for any person to be engaged with getting intimate with somebody. It has to be one-on-one, where you're both single with no attachment to a significant other.